Now that we've enveloped this character to the skeleton that we just created in the previous lesson, we're now ready to come in and start the process of doing a little bit of reweighting on the envelope weights. Because you can see as I move this manipulator around, you can see we definitely do have some issues with some caving in and some stretching. But like I said, that's fortunately a very, very simple process to fix in XSI. So what I'll do is first move one of these manipulators, one of these effectors, to the point where it starts to actually kind of skew this geometry out. Because what we can do now is reweight some of these pieces of geometry, and we'll be able to tell once that's been properly reweighted once this deformation disappears. Alright, now one thing that will make this process much, much easier is to turn on XSI's X-ray mode. So to do that, just simply go to the display options and turn on X-ray mode. That will actually let us see the skeleton that's hiding inside of this geometry. So you can see that each one of these different skeletal joints, or each one of these bones, is color-coded. So you can see we have a pink bone up here, we have a blue one down here, and so on and so forth. Now if you take a look at these points on the character itself, these points are color-coded as well, so that's showing which bone is affecting which joints, or which points. So you can see these pink points here are being affected pretty heavily by this bone. These blue points are being affected by this blue bone, and so on. So the process of reweighting this can be done by just simply selecting the object itself, and then go down to the Paint Weights panel, down in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Right, that will pull you into this new panel, where from here you can choose the different bones and then assign weights to these. So you'll be able to tell whenever you select a bone, for example the left shoulder, it will become highlighted here in our viewport. So you can see when I deselect it, the bone turns pink, but once it's selected, that bone will turn kind of a white color. Alright, so with this shoulder selected, what we actually want to be able to do is reweight some of these points to this central spine that runs down the chest. So what we need to do is actually find that bone. Here we go, all the way up at the very top. That's chest. So you can see that's been highlighted. So now what we can do is, using the add, if you click the W key on your keyboard, what that will do is, once you tap that, you can now see these different weighting areas of influence. So some of these areas right here that are blue, you can see those are being affected pretty heavily by the blue bone in this arm. So the way that this works is if you middle click, that will let you resize the painting area. So middle click to expand and paint a huge area, or you can paint just a really, really fine area. So what we want to be able to do is add influence back to these points. There we go. So all I need to do is come in, paint through this area in order to add that influence back. There we go. You can start to see this process happening now. Now let's go ahead and take some of these points for this back piece of the collar. Let's take some of these back as well, so that way the movement of this arm doesn't deform these areas too badly. Okay. Now, once you have things relatively well worked out, what you can always do is come back with your smooth tool and actually smooth and blend some of these weights back together a little bit better. So sometimes if you wind up with a really harsh transition between the points of these bones, you can very easily sometimes smooth these out. So we'll come back in, add a little bit more to this, and you can also adjust things like your smooth strength. So right now the smooth opacity is set to 100. So I could lower this down to a lower amount so it doesn't smooth quite as much, between each stroke. There we are. So once we're done with that, if we go back out of this weight painting panel, I just tap my spacebar to go back into object selection. You can now see that deformation is much cleaner. So now it just pretty much moves around the shoulder, and there's no more stretching and skewing around these parts of the chest or these parts of the collar. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on this other side. So I'll move this arm down until we start to see some deformation. Alright, and now, just like before, I go back to my weight painting panel. I'm going to paint these points on the side right back to this chest bone. So I'm going to press the W key to enter my weight painting mode. Let's actually switch this to an additive mode, so it'll actually add these points back onto the chest. Let's go ahead and get these points up here around the collar as well, so that way we don't accidentally deform any of these areas. There we go. You can start to see this taking shape now. There we go. So bringing some of these points back in. And just like before, if we now need to come back in and smooth this, we can smooth some of the weight transition between these points. There we go. Very nice. So once again, I'll tap my spacebar to get out of this weight painting mode. There we go. Much better. Now you might have areas like the legs, for example. If I expand this to a full screen view, you might see if I grab this leg manipulator and move the leg up, you can see the leg sort of collapses in on itself. It loses some of its volume. So what you can do is what's called a local reassign. So that can be done by just simply tagging a handful of points. We'll tag these and hold my shift key while I tag some of these points. There we are. Now, with these points selected, we can do what's called a local reassign. In other words, 100% assign these points to a specific bone. So if I go down to Envelope, Reassign Locally, it'll bring me into a picking session, and it's going to ask me now, which bone do you want to assign these points to? Just select this bone. Whenever you're done, right-click, and there we go. So I need to do the same thing now for these thigh bones. So I'll tag a point, and then I'll just simply Alt-middle click to loop select this entire ring. There we go. So Alt-middle click, that'll grab those. Just like before, go to Envelope, Reassign Locally. We'll set it to a particular bone, and then right-click to end that picking session. Alright, so what we have now is a very harsh transition between these two bones. So on the one hand, the leg does a much better job of maintaining its volume, but we do have a pretty harsh transition. So what we can always do is tag all of these points and then just simply smooth the envelope weights between those. So to do that, just go to Envelope and down to Smooth Envelope Weights. Right, and from here you can adjust things like the distance or the depth that these are going to smooth. You can adjust the scaling distance. So we'll pretty much leave these as they are. Smooth these down a little bit, just enough to give you a nice little bit of creasing between the knee area. Alright, so that's how you can reassign entire joints to a particular area, doing what's called a reassign locally. Alright, and I'm going to come in and looks like we have some pretty significant stretching here around the hips. So you can see as I move this, we get some pretty major stretching that's happening right in these areas. So what I need to do is take areas of the pelvis and then reweight these back to this lower spine bone. Alright, you can see that all the way down at the bottom, this spine one. So let's go ahead and do add. And you can see by looking at this, most of these areas are being pretty much fully influenced by these parts of the thigh bone. So what I can do is just simply come back and reweight some of these areas. Now if I need to, I can always come back and lower this opacity for the additive function so I don't add quite so much with each stroke. But for the most part, this is going to be what I need to fix a lot of this deformation that's happening and this crunching that's happening right in these back areas. Alright, so I can come in, take some of these areas back up. There we go, that's much better. So, and then just like before, if I need to, I could always take my smooth, sort of smooth the weights back between these. Okay, let's go ahead and see how this looks. So there we go. All in all, that's now much, much cleaner. So you'll just need to repeat this process for a few of these other points. So you can see that we do have still a little bit of crunching that's going on in here. So we could always come back, like I said, and just simply smooth these points back down. Let's actually give this a little bit higher smooth depth. So all of these can be kind of finessed and adjusted to where they're nicely back in place. Maybe lower my brush size a little bit more. So sometimes you might run into some of these minor refresh issues. That's okay, just go ahead and keep painting and XSI should catch back up eventually. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and just pause the lesson while I make a few more minor adjustments to this weighting, and then once we have this done, we'll be ready to start on the actual animation for this game character.